Hi, I'm Caitlin, and this is Book Chats, and this is my October wrap-up. I'm sorry that I have a dorky headset on today. My neighbors are playing very loud, very loud music and have been for the past couple hours, and I don't want you to have to hear that. Here's the thing. You know how there is at least one tag that goes around every so often that has a question that's like, if you get to the end of the year and you're not even close to your goal, what do you do? And previously, when I've seen people answer that question, I've always been like, I don't know, I've never had that problem. I've never had to know. And then this year came, and it was October, and I was 9 books behind the pace I needed to be for the first time since I started tracking my goals on Goodreads. And I found out that when that situation appears, I am that girl who goes through her to-read list and finds the shortest, quickest reads possible and binges all of them. Then I counted how many books I read in October, and I read 21 books in the month of October. Yes. I don't know, guys. It was a panic. I'm going to put every book that I read in the month, all 21 of them, down in the description box below, but I'm not going to talk about all of them. In fact, I'm not even going to mention all of them. I'm only going to talk about the ones I think I have something interesting to say about, which is still like half of them. I'm first going to talk about 3 graphic novels I read, actually, but one of them is like in a series. And they're 2 kind of graphic novel series that I really like and am interested in finishing. The first was Ms. Marvel, which I really enjoyed. I've heard really good things about this for a long time, and I've had it on my to-read list for a long time. But I finally got a kick in the butt from Pop Culture Happy Hour, which is a great podcast that NPR puts out. I would definitely recommend listening to it if you like pop culture and talking about pop culture things. They did one where they talked about Ms. Marvel, and I wanted to have the context of having actually read it before I listened. So I got it from my library, and I read the first volume. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting. I thought it explored a lot of things that I don't really have any grounds to have commentary on. The experience of being a child of immigrants in the United States and the experience of balancing like religion as well as just like girl power and girls being awesome. I'm definitely interested in continuing it. And then I read a graphic novel that really pushed and challenged me in an area of history that I don't know as much about as I should. That is the civil rights movement, and specifically the graphic novel is March, Book 1 and 2. These are by John Lewis and one of his congressional aides. John Lewis is a member of Congress and also was a huge part of the civil rights movement as a student. And I was actually trying to wait until all 3 of these books were out to read them, and then I was like, nope, I'm panicking and I need to read all the books, and I'm really glad that I did. I think that these are a rare and interesting book that takes a piece of history that we know something about, and that in some ways we feel like we don't need to learn more about, and tells us that yes, we do need to know more about it, and also that there are so many interesting, fascinating things we don't know, and also like so many interesting parallels to today. It's really near history. The civil rights movement did not happen that long ago. I loved these graphic novels for the way that they pushed me and the way that I learned from them, and it was great. The next set of books I'm going to talk about are all novels that I read, like normal length novels. I finally read Mistborn, The Final Empire, which a friend told me to read years ago, and other people who I admire have really loved and enjoyed, and I finally got my butt together and read it, and I just don't know, like I didn't get it. Like, it was over-described in a way that felt like, I'm proving to you how smart I am. And it was just frustrating. I thought it very much reeked of a female character written by a man who does not understand women and how they think, and it was frustrating. Also, the male main character is always making little, like, side comments about how he's like, oh, I'm complimenting this female because she clearly has low self-esteem, and that will fix it all. And I'm just like, if that fixed low self-esteem, like, that's not... Anyway, I probably will actually continue with this series because I've heard that the second book has a ton of political intrigue, and that is like catnip to me, but I just don't understand why people love this book so much. Like, what? I don't get it. You're welcome to tell me below what I'm not getting, because I really don't know. And then for some books I enjoyed, I finally read The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. I think what I liked about it is it reminded me very strongly of another book that I read earlier this year, which was Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. They're both books about teenage boys and in the perspective of teenage boys, and teenage boys are pretty self-centered and talk about themselves, teenagers in general. Or maybe I'm just basing this off of me, but I'm going to be real. So I thought that The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian was a very interesting book to put side by side to that, because in some ways the main character is just as like teenage boy as the main character of Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl is, but because he is not, like a privileged white boy from the suburbs with academic parents, he doesn't have the luxury and privilege of being 100% self-centered, and like being able to be so self-focused is a privilege. So then I read The Walls Around Us. I finally finished it. My friend Stephanie, who's at Shine Notebooks, had told me to read this months ago, and I'd been like, okay, and then she'd been like, but by the way, it's about ballerinas, and then I had been like, because I love reading books about ballerinas, and it's like a psychological thriller, and it's like crazy sauce because it's by Nova Rensuma, who writes these like crazy magical realism books of like craziness. So I finally finished it, and it was great. It was crazy. It was beautifully written, and just is basically how I describe that book and what happened in it. I also read in November The One That I Want by Jennifer Eccles. I think this was my first Jennifer Eccles book, and I loved it, and I will definitely continue reading. It was like fluffy, but not totally fluffy. It dealt with serious-ish things as well as like awesome things, and the main character is a majorette, which is something I totally would have made fun of before, and she made it awesome, and I really enjoyed it. Now we are in a short section of books that I read partially because they were short and fast reads, but that I definitely enjoyed. So the first of those is one that was recommended to me by my younger sister. It's called Two Girls Staring at the Ceiling, and it's a novel in verse, and it kind of has interesting formatting on the page, and I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very interesting, and it is about Crohn's disease, basically. It just brought Crohn's disease and the challenges that come with it, especially in teenagers, to mind in a way that I hadn't considered. I also read The Crossover by Kwame Alexander. It is about twin brothers who play basketball. They are junior high schoolers, but about to enter high school, and their dad was a professional basketball player in Europe. And it's about their relationship with basketball, their relationship with each other, their relationship with their dad, and also how all of those things change when a couple big things happen in their life, including one of the brothers getting a girlfriend. I thought it was so fascinating how much you were told in so few words, and I just ate it up. I also read We Should All Be Feminists, which is a very short, very tiny book, and it is really basically just a transcript of a TED Talk, which I'll also link below. I like a lot of the points that are made. I like kind of some of the interesting things that she has to say about culture and feminist culture, and I really liked that book. Then the last two books, some of my favorite books of the month, and I listened to them both on audiobook. One of them is The Winner's Crime by Marie Rutkowski. I read The Winner's Curse at the beginning of the year, and I was really excited for this book to come out, and then for various reasons I just hadn't read it to this point. I was basically getting in a car and driving to visit a sibling of mine who lives about 4.5 hours away from me, and I just popped in the audiobook on the way there, and it's funny because the audiobook is super weird. Like, there's multiple different cultures in this book, and the narrator does like accents for different cultures, but one of the accents for like the main culture is like, or the conquering culture is, it's just so, I can't explain how weird it is, but it's weird. But by the time I popped it in and listened to it because I was like driving and I couldn't really change it, and then I got hooked on the story, and I was like, I don't even care about the weird narrator, I'm just gonna listen to the story. Loved it. I never properly talked about the first book in the series because there are some things that people like brought up that I think are valid points, but I just either had the privilege of ignoring or weren't a problem to me personally. If you like the first book, you will like the second book, and oh my gosh, there were parts when I was reading it and I was like white knuckle gripping my steering wheel and like yelling at the audiobook in the car because I was so afraid for some characters and whether or not they would live or have other bad things happen to them. It was like highly entertaining and definitely kept me alert on my drive. And then the final book I'm going to talk about is one that was my favorite of the month, definitely, and I also listened to it on audiobook. This is Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. I read this because it was recommended by Jane on her channel, Yes Miss Jane. This book took me, so I read a lot of young adult fiction, and I also read a lot of nonfiction, but I read a lot of young adult fiction, and when I do read adult fiction, it's always really hard because the challenge about adult fiction is it takes longer to read than young adult fiction, so if I don't like it, I'm extra disappointed. Like, if a young adult book was just okay, or I don't like it, whatever, I only wasted so many days on it, but if an adult book was just okay or I didn't like it, I feel like I wasted double the time on it. And so I really struggle sometimes to read adult fiction, even though I'm an adult and I probably should read more, because it's just such a more of an investment. So I picked up Ordinary Grace solely on Jane's recommendation, and I listened to it on audio, and the first maybe third to half of the book, I was like, okay, this is interesting, but not that interesting and kind of weird, and I don't know. It's basically it's from the point of view of this boy, this young boy, I think he's like 10 or 12, and he, this summer when a lot of things changed in his family and in his life, and about in the middle of the book, someone who's pretty close to this boy is found dead, and they aren't really sure how or why this happened, and it's kind of about the way that death affects his family, because it's someone who's very close to his family, and it's at that moment just becomes so interesting, and the way that the author deals with it. So this boy, his dad is a pastor who was not a pastor. He was a lawyer. He was a law student, and then he fought in the Vietnam War, and he came back and became a pastor. And his wife was like, what? I didn't think I'd be a pastor's wife. And like just the way that this event affects the family and affects each of the boys and the mom and the dad, and the way that the author talks about that and is just so profound and interesting and well written, and just absolutely worth every minute that I spent reading this book. It was really beautiful. I was really happy that I read it. I really enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed that it kind of has this like exploration of faith theme to it, or of like how different people like events affects their faith differently. I actually feel, so I don't talk about this a ton, but I am an evangelical Christian, and I really struggle a lot of times to find kind of representations of my faith or of people of faith in literature. I've been reading a lot this year. I might do a video at the end of the year of books that deal with kind of questions of faith in this struggle just to read them. And it's one of the reasons I love Ray Carson's Girl, Fire and Thorns trilogy so much. I will always tell people, like, you have to read this book, it's about faith, and then they'll like read the back and be like, no, it's not. But I love when characters are kind of questioning things, and or when their faith is used to help them to understand, or like a lens they see their world through. And I feel like William Kent Kruger does that in a really, really profound and beautiful way in this book. So Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger, definitely the best book of the month. All right, those are the books that I had the most interesting things to say this month. I, again, will put the whole list of books that I read down in the comments below, and I will link to Goodreads. If you want to know more about any of these books, you can ask me on Twitter, or you can go on Goodreads and find out whether or not I wrote a review, although I'm pretty behind on writing reviews. And thank you so much for watching, and for sticking through all of my sporadic posting. I'll just end it there. Talk to you later. Bye.